The first thing the coach said to him wasn't hello. It was, "You lost, boy? Or did you come to sweep the floors?" The gym fell silent. Gloves stopped hitting bags, ropes stopped squeaking under jumpers, and every head turned. The taxi driver Marcus Green stood just inside the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the pale light from outside. His hands, still smelling faintly of gasoline and worn leather from the cab, hung loose at his sides. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply looked at the man who had spoken, eyes unreadable. Coach Rick Dalton, 5-time state champion. Silver hair slicked back, and an ego as swollen as his old knuckle smirked like he'd just cracked the funniest joke in the world. The laughter that followed wasn't from humor. It was nervous, half-hearted, the kind of laugh people give when they know they're supposed to. Marcus stepped forward, his boots thudding against the scuffed wooden floor. He scanned the gym-sweaty fighters, rows of dusty trophies, a faded poster of Muhammad Ali on the wall. The smell of stale sweat and cheap disinfectant clung to the air. He'd been in worse places. "I'm here to see if you're worth the reputation," Marcus said, his voice calm, deep, and steady. Rick raised an eyebrow, leaning against the ropes of the nearest ring like a king on his throne. "Reputation? I don't train amateurs who wander in off the street. Especially not taxi drivers looking for a hobby." A few of the younger fighters chuckled too loudly, trying to earn Rick's approval. But one of them, a wiry Latino kid shadowboxing in the corner, kept glancing between Marcus and Rick like he knew this was about to turn ugly. Marcus tilted his head, studying Rick. "That your rule? Or just the one you use when the amateur's skin's darker than yours?" The temperature in the room dropped. Someone muttered, "Damn," under their breath. Rick's smile faded, but only slightly. "Careful, son. This is my gym. You don't walk in here and start throwing around accusations." Marcus didn't blink. "I didn't throw anything. Just asking a question." Rick straightened up, stepping forward. The years hadn't completely stolen his physique. He was still broad, still imposing. "I've been training fighters for 30 years. You think you're the first hothead to come in here with a chip on his shoulder? You think you can last a round with one of my boys?" "I don't need one of your boys," Marcus said quietly. "I just need you." The gym went still again. The wiry Latino kid froze mid-combination. The jump ropes hit the floor. The smell of sweat seemed sharper now. Rick's eyes narrowed. "You challenging me, cabbie?" Marcus's lips curved just enough to suggest a smile. "If you think you can handle it." Rick barked a laugh, but it didn't sound real. "All right, tough guy. Let's give the kids a lesson in humility. You and me. 1 round. No headgear." Marcus took off his hoodie, revealing a body honed not by gym mirrors and supplements, but by years of hard, physical labor. Broad chest, thick forearms, scars that told stories without words. A murmur spread through the room. "You sure about this, coach?" one of the fighters whispered. Rick didn't answer. His pride had already made the decision for him. They climbed into the ring. The Latino kid name tag on his hoodie read Luis, was volunteered as referee. His hands trembled slightly as he checked their gloves. Rick grinned, flashing yellowed teeth. "Don't worry, I'll go easy on you." Marcus just rolled his shoulders, eyes locked on Rick's. "Don't." The bell rang. Rick came forward fast, throwing a lazy jab to test him, but Marcus slipped it without even flinching. Rick threw another, harder this time. Marcus caught it with his glove, pivoted, and in one swift motion, sent a short hook into Rick's ribs. The sound was sharp, like a hammer hitting wood. Rick's breath caught, and a few people winced. Marcus didn't press. He stepped back, letting Rick come again. Rick snarled, rushing with a combination left, right, left hook, but Marcus blocked each one with clean precision. His movements weren't flashy, but they were efficient. He didn't waste a single ounce of energy. "You fight like you've done this before," Rick grunted, circling. Marcus's eyes didn't leave his. "Once or twice." Then it happened. Rick overextended on a cross, and Marcus slid in, pivoted his hips, and landed a straight right to Rick's chin. It wasn't full power. Marcus had pulled it, but it was enough to send the coach stumbling back against the ropes. The room erupted in gasps. Rick's face turned red, not from the punch, but from humiliation. He charged again, but Marcus sidestepped, letting the older man's momentum carry him into the corner. Another quick jab to the midsection. Another grunt. By the end of the round, Rick was breathing hard, sweat dripping from his chin. Marcus looked like he'd just stepped out of a warm-up. The bell rang, and Marcus lowered his gloves. That enough of a lesson? Rick didn't answer. His chest heaved. He looked at the faces around him, the kids he'd trained, the fighters who'd feared him, and saw something in their eyes he'd never seen before: doubt. Marcus stepped closer, his voice low enough for only Rick to hear. You judge a man before you know him, you'll end up on the ropes every time. He left the ring without waiting for applause. The room stayed silent until the door closed behind him. The gym buzzed again, but the atmosphere had changed. Conversations were hushed, glances were exchanged, and for the first time in years, Rick Dalton didn't have the loudest presence in the room. Luis leaned against the ring apron, eyes wide. He'd seen the old man handle cocky street fighters before, always ending in bruises and ice packs. But this time, it wasn't the visitor who left humbled. Rick stayed in the ring longer than necessary, as if stalling would somehow undo what had just happened. He rubbed his jaw, flexed his gloves, but inside, his pride bled. Marcus walked down the cracked sidewalk outside, hoodie back on, the evening air sharp with the smell of fried food from the corner diner. His phone buzzed in his pocket, 3 missed calls from Mom. He knew what that meant. His mother needed her medication, and her insurance hadn't cleared the refill. He sighed, stepped into his cab, and started the engine. The seat springs squeaked in protest. The dashboard clock blinked, 7:14 p.m. He still had a few hours left before he had to pick up the last run of the night. As he pulled away from the curb, a shadow moved at the far end of the street. A man in a gray hoodie flagged him down. Marcus slowed. The guy hopped in, and immediately the smell of cheap liquor filled the cab. East Side. The man slurred, tossing a crumpled bill into the front seat. Marcus nodded, no words exchanged. Years of driving had taught him that sometimes silence was safer than conversation. But in the rear view, he caught the man's staring eyes, glassy, smile crooked. You fight? The passenger suddenly asked. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. Not anymore. Could have fooled me, the man said, chuckling. Saw you at Dalton's tonight. Marcus's grip on the wheel tightened. You were there? The man nodded. Words already going around. You dropped the old man like a sack of bricks. People like seeing him taken down a peg. Marcus didn't answer, but he knew how gossip worked in places like this. By morning, the story would be twisted into something it wasn't. Some would call it a fluke. Others would swear it was an outright humiliation. Either way, it would follow him. Back at the gym, Rick sat alone in his office, a paper cup of stale coffee cooling in his hand. His reflection in the window was a reminder of what he hated most: looking weak. He replayed the round in his head, each moment sharper than the last. Marcus's footwork, the way he anticipated every punch, the power behind those short, controlled strikes. It wasn't beginner's luck. It was the kind of skill that came from years in the ring. But why the hell was a fighter like that driving a cab? The more Rick thought about it, the more it gnawed at him. And underneath the bruised pride, something else stirred curiosity. The next day, Marcus was parked outside the grocery store, helping his mother carry a bag of groceries into her apartment. She was a petite woman with sharp eyes and a voice that could cut through concrete. You went to that gym again, she said, reading him without effort. Marcus sighed, just to see what it was about. And he hesitated. The coach is an ass. She smirked. Ain't news. That man's been looking down on folks since the 90s. I told your father to stay away from him. At the mention of his father, Marcus's jaw tightened. He's not worth talking about. His mother gave him that look, the one that said she'd drop it, but only for now. Just remember, baby, some people ain't worth proving yourself to. Their minds are locked up tighter than a vault. But Rick Dalton wasn't done. 2 days later, Marcus pulled into a gas station, only to find Rick leaning against the hood of his truck, arms crossed. You following me now? Marcus asked. Rick shrugged. Call it unfinished business. I think we finished it in the ring. Rick smirked, but his tone was different this timeless bite, more probing. Where'd you learn to fight like that? Marcus tossed the gas pump into its holder. Here and there. That's not an answer. Marcus slid into his driver's seat. Not a question I feel like answering. Rick stepped forward. Look, I'm not here to pick another fight. Truth is, I misjudged you. And yeah, maybe I ran my mouth where I shouldn't have. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Maybe. Rick ignored the jab. I've got a kid in the gym, Luis. Good hands. Quick. But he's got no discipline. He's heading for trouble. I can't get through to him. But maybe you could. Marcus laughed once, short and sharp. So now you want the taxi driver's help? Rick met his eyes. Yeah. Because I saw what you can do. And I think the kid needs it. Marcus didn't answer right away. Something in Rick's voice sounded almost genuine. But years of dealing with men like him taught Marcus to be cautious. Not interested, Marcus said, starting the engine. Find someone else. That night, Marcus dreamed of the ring off his father's voice shouting from the corner, of blood in his mouth, of the roar of a crowd. He woke with a start, sweat cooling on his skin. It had been years since he let himself think about those days. By morning, he had almost convinced himself to forget about Rick's offer. But as he drove his route, he passed the gym. Through the open door, he saw Luis working the heavy bag sloppy, too much arm, no hip rotation. A couple of older fighters stood nearby, shaking their heads. Marcus pulled over. Against his better judgment, he stepped inside. Luis noticed him immediately, pausing mid-combination. You here to beat up the old man again? Marcus smirked. Nah, I'm here because you're punching like you're swatting flies. Luis frowned. And you're better? Marcus picked up a pair of mitts from the bench. Let's find out. For the next hour, he drilled Luis' footwork, timing, combinations. The kid was raw, but there was potential. By the end, Luis was sweating buckets, but his punches had rhythm. Rick watched from a distance, arms folded, saying nothing. When Marcus left, Rick called after him. Appreciate it. Marcus didn't respond, but he didn't slam the door on the way out, either. Over the next week, Marcus found himself stopping by the gym more often. Sometimes to work with Luis, sometimes just to watch. The atmosphere slowly shifted. Fighters who once gave him wary looks now greeted him with nods. Even Rick kept his insults to himself. But the city had a way of reminding you where you stood. One evening, after closing the gym, Marcus walked Luis home. They cut through an alley to save time. Halfway through, a squad car pulled up, lights flashing. Two officers stepped out, both white, both young. Hands where we can see them, one barked. Marcus and Luis exchanged confused glances. What's this about? Marcus asked, raising his hands. Got a report about two suspicious males in the area, the other officer said. Luis looked at Marcus. We're just walking home, man. Quiet, the first cop snapped. One officer patted Luis down while the other went through Marcus's pockets without asking. When they found nothing, they muttered something about staying out of trouble and left. Luis's jaw was tight. They didn't even. Let it go, Marcus said quietly, but inside his blood boiled. He'd been through this before, too many times to count. And every time, it left the same bitter taste. The next day, Marcus didn't show up at the gym. Or the day after. Luis asked Rick where he was, but the coach only shrugged. It wasn't until the third day that Rick found Marcus at the diner, sitting alone at the counter. You disappeared, Rick said, sliding onto the stool next to him. Got things to do, Marcus replied without looking up. Rick studied him for a moment. Luis told me about what happened with the cops. Marcus's jaw worked. Not your business. Maybe not, but it's the kind of thing that makes me think I've been blind to a lot. Marcus snorted. Congratulations. You figured out the world's unfair. I'm serious, Rick said. I've been in my own bubble too long. I used to think if a guy worked hard enough, he'd get his shot. But I've seen you, Marcus. You've got the skills, the discipline. And yet, here you are driving a cab. Marcus finally looked at him. You don't know half the story. Then tell me. Marcus hesitated. For years, he'd kept that part of his life locked away. But something in Rick's voice, something that sounded almost like respect, made him speak. I fought pro once. Had a decent record. Then I got into a fight outside the ring. Guy I hit ended up in the hospital. He was white. The cops didn't care about the details. I lost my license, my sponsors, everything. Nobody wanted to touch me after that. Rick didn't say anything for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. That's a damn shame. Marcus shrugged. Life moves on. Doesn't mean you can't fight again, Rick said. There's an underground tournament next month. Big purse. No licenses, no politics. You win, you could start over. Marcus shook his head. I'm done with that life. Rick leaned closer. Maybe, but think about what it'd mean for the kid. For Luis to see someone who's been through hell and came out swinging. Marcus didn't answer. But for the rest of the night, the thought wouldn't leave him alone. Marcus spent the next few nights driving longer hours, hoping exhaustion would drown out the thought of Rick's offer. It didn't. Every time the cab idled at a red light, he found himself replaying the moment in the gym when Rick had said, You win, you could start over. The words were dangerous. Hope always was. On Thursday night, Marcus was sitting in his parked cab outside a late-night burger joint, eating cold fries, when Luis appeared at the window. "You've been dodging me," Luis said, leaning against the door. Marcus chewed slowly. "Been working. You should hear the way Coach talks about you now," Luis said with a grin. "It's like you're some legend." Marcus snorted. "Legends don't drive cabs." Luis ignored that. "He told me about the tournament. You thinking about it?" Marcus looked out at the dark street. "No." "Why not?" "Because I know what happens in those places. No refs worth a damn, no medicals, no rules that matter. Guys leave in stretchers. Some don't leave at all." Luis didn't flinch. "I've seen you move. You could win. Hell, you could wipe the floor with half the guys in this city." "That's not the point," Marcus said. "Once you step into that ring, you don't come out the same." Luis studied him for a moment, then said quietly, "Maybe that's the point." The following evening, Rick showed up at Marcus's building. It was the first time Marcus had seen him outside the gym, and he looked different in street clothes, less intimidating, more human. "You mind if I come in?" Rick asked. Marcus hesitated, then stepped aside. The small apartment smelled faintly of coffee and the lavender air freshener his mother insisted on. She was in her room watching TV, but Rick still gave a polite nod toward the closed door. "I'm not here to twist your arm," Rick began, sitting at the kitchen table. "But I need to tell you something about that tournament." Marcus crossed his arms. "I already know enough." "Maybe not." Rick's voice dropped. "The guy running it, Eddie the Razor Carver. We go way back. He's as dirty as they come. Takes bets on fights, rigs outcomes when it suits him. But he respects real fighters. And if you walk in there and drop whoever he throws at you, he'll put your name on the map again." Marcus shook his head, not interested in his kind of respect. Rick leaned forward. "What if I told you one of the fighters on the card is a guy who's been feeding Eddie information on local gyms and who's been supplying those cops with tips about suspicious activity? Guys like you and Luis are the reason he gets paid." That hit harder than Marcus expected. "You're saying?" "I'm saying this isn't just about money," Rick interrupted. "It's about shutting someone up who's been using his skin color and his connections to keep people like you down." Marcus's jaw tightened. He hated being manipulated, but there was a bitter truth in Rick's words. For the next week, Marcus trained. Not in the open, not in the gym where people could watch, but in a rundown warehouse 2 blocks from the river. Luis brought him hand wraps and old gloves, and they worked under flickering lights that buzzed like flies. At first, his body resisted, the lungs burned, the shoulders ached. But muscle memory is stubborn. Every day, the movements got sharper. The bag stopped swinging wildly when he hit it. It snapped under the force. His footwork tightened. His guard became a wall. Luis pushed him. "Again. Faster. Turn your hips. You're not here to survive, you're here to dominate." Marcus didn't say it out loud, but part of him liked hearing that. 2 nights before the tournament, Rick visited the warehouse. He stood in the doorway, watching Marcus unleash a 5-punch combination that ended with a hook so hard the heavy bag's chain rattled. "You're ready," Rick said. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead. "You sure this isn't just about you getting bragging rights?" Rick smirked. "Maybe a little, but mostly, I want to see you make him bleed." The night of the fight smelled of beer, sweat, and bad intentions. The venue was an abandoned factory dressed up with floodlights and folding chairs. The crowd was a mix of street punks, gamblers, and men in expensive suits pretending they were slumming it for the thrill. Marcus kept his hood up, moving through the crowd with Luis and Rick at his side. They found the makeshift locker area, rows of benches, and a single cracked mirror. His opponent's name was Tommy Vance, a stocky white fighter with a reputation for brawling and a habit of taunting anyone darker than a paper bag. Rick had told Marcus enough about him to know the man was dangerous in the way a cornered animal is. The first fight of the night was bloody. The second ended in a knockout so fast the crowd booed. By the time Marcus's name was called, the room was buzzing with anticipation. He stepped into the ring under blinding lights. Across from him, Tommy grinning a mean, gap-toothed smile. "Didn't know they let cabbies in here," Tommy said loud enough for the crowd to hear. Marcus rolled his shoulders, saying nothing. The bell rang. Tommy came in fast, swinging wild, testing Marcus's guard. Marcus blocked, parried, waited. When Tommy overcommitted on a hook, Marcus stepped in and drove a jab into his nose. Blood spurted instantly. The crowd roared. Tommy snarled, coming harder. But Marcus was a wall. Every punch met with leather, every lunge countered with precision. In the second round, Marcus slipped under a haymaker and landed a body shot that made Tommy fold for half a second. It was all the opening he needed. A right cross, sharp and clean, sent Tommy stumbling into the ropes. Marcus didn't chase, let the man come to him, then ended it with a short uppercut that snapped his head back. Tommy hit the canvas. The ref counted, but everyone knew it was over. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, some in disbelief. Afterward, in the locker room, Rick clapped Marcus on the back. "That's what I'm talking about." Marcus sat down, unwrapping his hands. "I didn't do it for you." Rick grinned. "I know." Luis bounced on his heels, still riding the adrenaline. "You see the way he dropped? Like a bag of bricks." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. But in the back of his mind, he knew it wasn't over. Men like Eddie Carver didn't like having their favorites humiliated. And in the fight world especially, this kind of victory could be as dangerous as defeat. He was right. The next night, Marcus found a note taped to the cab's windshield. No name, just 4 words. "This isn't your city." He folded it once, slipped it into his pocket, and started the engine. But the message was clear. Someone wanted him gone. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.